The wind came off the ridge like a fist. It hit the parade ground at Fort Carver at 0530, scattering loose snow in long, flat sheets across the packed earth, finding every gap in every collar, every seam in every boot. The kind of cold that didn't announce itself, it simply arrived and refused to leave. Sergeant First Class Derek Holloway stood at the edge of the assembly area with his arms crossed and his breath coming out in short, irritated puffs. He was watching the new arrival walk across the ice-slicked ground from the transport vehicle, and what he saw did not impress him. She was small. That was the first thing. Not slight in the way of a runner, small in the way of someone who had no business being here. She carried a standard-issue duffel over one shoulder, her other hand loose at her side, her pace unhurried. No urgency. No nerves. No attempt to look like she belonged. She didn't look at anyone. "That's her?" Corporal Wade Stanton said, stepping up beside Holloway. He was 26, broad-shouldered, a year out of Ranger selection. He had that specific kind of confidence that came from never having failed anything he'd tried yet. Apparently. "What's her name?" "Mercer." Holloway uncrossed his arms. "Private First Class, Elise Mercer." Stanton watched her set her duffel down at the foot of the barrack steps with the same unhurried ease. "She looks like she's lost." "She looks like she's on vacation," said Private Cole Bateman from somewhere behind them. A few people laughed. She heard it. She gave no sign that she had, but she heard it the way a person hears something they've heard 1,000 times before and have long since decided is not worth the energy of acknowledgement. Staff Sergeant Patrick Rowe, Unit Intelligence and the one man in Echo Platoon who kept his mouth shut until he had a reason to open it, stood slightly apart. The economy of it, the way her eyes swept the compound once a single, smooth, pass without appearing to do so. The way she located the wind direction by the way she turned her head, the way she identified the sight lines before she'd set down her bag. Rowe said nothing. The unit's commanding officer, Captain Brian Kessler, emerged from the main building at 0545 and addressed the assembled platoon with the brevity of a man who believed that unnecessary words were a form of disrespect. He introduced Mercer as a transfer. He offered no further explanation. He said she would participate in all training cycles beginning immediately. He went back inside. That was it. Holloway looked at her. She looked back briefly, without hostility, without warmth. Then she looked away. "Princess," Stanton said, under his breath, just loud enough. A few people heard it. No one objected. The name stuck the way those names always stick, not because they were earned, but because they went unanswered. The barracks at Fort Carver were functional in the way of all military barracks, adequate, spare, stripped of anything that might suggest comfort was a priority. Mercer was assigned the far bunk in the corner, near the window that let in the draft. No one helped her move her things. No one spoke to her at dinner. She ate alone. She ate efficiently. She was done before most people had finished their first serving. Private First Class Darcy Schaefer, the closest thing the platoon had to a conscience, watched her from across the mess and felt a small, uncomfortable tug of recognition. She'd been the new one once. She knew what it looked like from the inside. She didn't cross the room. Later, she would think about that. She would think about it more than once. That night, when the lights were out and the wind outside had gone from a fist to something more like a long, sustained pressure against the walls, Holloway said quietly to Stanton in the dark, "She's going to be a problem. Not because she'd done anything wrong, because she hadn't done anything at all." Training began at 0500. The cold at that hour was a different animal, thicker, more personal. It got inside the lungs and stayed there. The obstacle course was coated in a thin layer of ice that made every handhold a negotiation. Sergeant Holloway ran the drills without mercy and without interest in complaint. Mercer ran the course. She didn't lead. She didn't fall behind. She finished in the middle of the group and stood, breathing steadily, while Bateman came in behind her and made a show of gasping dramatically, grinning at Stanton. "Warming up for you, Princess?" he said. She didn't answer. She was already rotating her shoulder, checking the joint, pressing 2 fingers against the side of her neck to count something. "She's not even breathing hard," Schaefer said, quietly, to herself. She was right. That was the thing that Bateman and Stanton had not noticed. The others were red-faced, steam rising off their jackets, hands on knees. Mercer stood straight, chest rising and falling at a pace that suggested she had not been significantly challenged. At the range, the day's qualification drill involved iron sights at 200 yards in crosswind conditions. Standard stuff. Stanton shot clean, made a point of letting people know it. Bateman went over his performance twice at lunch. Mercer shot clean. She said nothing about it. There was a moment brief, observable only if you were watching for it, where she adjusted her grip between the third and fourth shots. A micro-correction. The kind of adjustment that came from understanding what the round was doing in the air, not just pointing and firing. Rowe, positioned at the adjacent lane, saw it. He'd spent 3 years as a forward observer. He knew what it looked like when someone was reading a shot, not just taking one. He filed it away. In the afternoon, land navigation through the backwoods of the training area, 8 kilometers in snow, with a compass, timed. The forest was dense and the snowpack was uneven, concealing roots and creek beds under a uniform white surface that gave no indication of what was beneath it. Stanton's team got turned around in the second valley and lost 40 minutes. Mercer came in first, alone. She'd gone without a team partner, as there'd been an odd number, and Holloway had assigned her last after no one volunteered to pair with her. She'd simply gone by herself and come back, with all 6 markers confirmed. Lucky route, Stanton said. She sat down on the bench outside the staging area and unlaced her left boot and shook out a small stone. Then she relaced the boot, stood, and went inside. Rowe watched the door close behind her. Simulated urban operations. A disused industrial complex 3 miles from the main base, converted into a training environment. A warren of corridors and stairwells and broken sightlines, every surface stained with old rust and the particular grime of years of use by men who did not think much about the condition of the things they used. The exercise was a room-clearing drill with opposing force. Red team held the interior. Blue team went in. Non-lethal marking rounds. The objective was a simulated hostage on the 4th floor. Bateman was on point. He took the first corner with confidence, the kind of confidence that looks like competence until the moment it doesn't. He missed the tripwire. Not a real one. A training tripwire, rigged to a flare canister. The kind that discharged a sharp crack and a burst of red smoke to simulate casualty. He walked directly into it, and the canister went off 18 inches from his face. In a real operation, he was dead. In the confusion, the smoke, the burst of shouting from Red Team moving to exploit the opening, Mercer moved. She came through the left corridor fast and low, cut across the smoke before it fully dispersed, and put 3 marking rounds through the gap in the door where Red Team's flanking element was staging. Clean. Rapid. She cleared the corner, identified the second element coming down the stairwell, called the position in a flat, controlled voice. Stairwell, 2 contacts, 3rd step, and dropped back to cover, holding the angle until Schaefer and Rowe advanced through. They took the objective. 2 minutes 30 seconds. Well within the exercise parameters. Bateman pulled the red smoke off his jacket and said, "Lucky red on that stairwell." Silence. Even Stanton didn't agree with him out loud. But he didn't disagree either, and in that silence the comment stood, unrebutted, which was close enough to agreement. Mercer stripped her marking weapon and went to the equipment table and began field stripping it with the same efficiency she applied to everything. She didn't look at Bateman. She didn't look at any of them. Schaefer started to say something. She stopped herself. Later, she would not be able to explain exactly why she'd stopped. There had been an opportunity to push back, and she had let it close. She knew it while it was happening, and she let it happen anyway, because that was easier than choosing a side. That night, Rowe sat in the planning room after the debrief and pulled up the exercise footage on the training monitor. He watched Mercer's movement through the smoke twice, then a 3rd time. He went to Kessler's office, knocked. "Her file?" he said. "I'd like to take a look." Kessler looked up from his paperwork, held Rowe's gaze for a moment. "Go to bed, Sergeant. Go to bed." Rowe was methodical. He had not gotten to his position by being impulsive, or by letting things drop because someone told him to let them drop. He waited 2 days. He went through the standard channels, the personnel access request, the training file portal, the unit integration database that held records on all attached personnel. Every access point returned the same result. Classification level. Restricted authorization required. He tried the adjacent field. Next of kin. Emergency contact. Standard information, non-sensitive, available on any active duty file. Restricted. He tried date of entry into service. Training installation, MOS code. Restricted, restricted, restricted. He sat back from the terminal. In 11 years of service, he had accessed hundreds of personnel files. He had pulled records on people at every rank, across multiple branches, across multiple classification tiers. He had never not once encountered a restriction block on the basic administrative record of an active duty enlisted soldier assigned to a conventional training unit. That didn't happen. That didn't happen unless someone had specifically and deliberately ensured that it would. He thought about what that meant. He thought about the way she moved through smoke, the micro-correction between rounds, the way she had come in first on land navigation through a forest she had never seen. He went to the range the following morning and stood behind the observation post while the day's drills ran. He watched Mercer shoot. She was using the standard-issue rifle. Nothing custom, nothing modified. She was shooting at the same targets as everyone else, at the same distances, under the same conditions, a 20-knot crosswind out of the northwest, temperature at -9°C. He watched her breathe. Between shots, she breathed out completely, not partially completely. She let her body go still in a way that required years of specific, deliberate practice to achieve. The kind of stillness that was not natural, the kind that was trained into the body 1 hour at a time until it became automatic. He knew one category of shooter who breathed like that. He went back to his rack and lay on his back and stared at the ceiling for a long time. When Holloway came in later and asked what he was doing, Rowe said, "Thinking." "About what?" "Mercer." Holloway was quiet for a moment. Then, "Don't." The snowstorm hit Fort Carver on a Wednesday at 1,400 and was fully developed by 1,740-knot gusts, visibility under 100 meters, temperature dropping fast, the kind of conditions that ended training days early. Kessler did not end the training day early. The sniper qualification drill had been delayed twice for weather. The third scheduled date was today, and Kessler ran the drill in the storm with the flat certainty of a man who believed that the enemy did not cancel its operations for bad weather, and therefore neither would he. The target array was set at 600 yards, in storm conditions, in failing light. Bateman shot first. He was a competent rifleman, good fundamentals, consistent under normal conditions. He fired his 5-round string, scored 2 on target, 3 outside the scoring rings. He came back from the firing position, shaking his head. "Not possible in this," he said. "Nobody's shooting at 600 in this." Stanton shot next. 1 on target. He didn't say anything when he came back. 3 more shooters ran through the drill. The best score was 3 out of 5, and that came from Schaefer, who had spent 2 seasons shooting competitively before enlisting, and whose mechanics were clean enough to overcome some of the conditions. Then Mercer. She walked to the position and went prone and settled in without adjusting anything visible, no repositioning, no preliminary fidgeting, no consultation of notes or calculations. She spent 45 seconds in stillness. The wind gusted at 38 knots during those 45 seconds. The target downrange was invisible to the naked eye. The light was going gray and flat. She fired. The range control radio crackled. "Impact, target 1, center mass." She adjusted. Not the rifle. Something internal, a breath, a decision, a calculation. The adjustment took 2 seconds. She fired again. "Impact, target 2, center mass." She went through the string. 5 rounds, 5 on target. 3 of the 5 in the primary scoring ring, the innermost circle on the man-sized silhouette at 600 yards in a 40-knot storm in failing light. She stood, cleared the weapon, walked back to the group. Nobody spoke for a moment. Bateman said, "The wind must have dropped." Rowe looked at the wind gauge on the range post. The needle was at 36. Nobody answered Bateman. Mercer handed her weapon to the armorer and walked toward the warming tent. She didn't look back. The mission brief came at 2,200 on a Thursday. A surveillance element, 3 vehicles, 2 personnel in each, had gone dark in the valley sector, 12 kilometers north of the forward operating position. Last known coordinates placed them in a tree line above a frozen creek. Radio contact lost at 1730. No signal since. Kessler put a recovery team together. 6 personnel, 2 vehicles, moving at 2,300. He put Mercer on it. Holloway started to say something. Kessler looked at him. He stopped. The valley at night in winter was a specific kind of dark, not the dark of absence, but the dark of presence, of heavy weather and dense tree cover and snow that swallowed sound and transformed the familiar geometry of terrain into something without landmarks, without reference points. The vehicles moved without lights on the last 2 kilometers. They found the surveillance element's position at 0035. Both vehicles disabled, one by mechanical failure, one by something that had punched through the engine block with deliberate force. 3 personnel accounted for and mobile, 1 down, non-critical, 2 missing. Then the tree line opened up. 6, 7 contacts muzzle flash from the high ground to the north, from the creek bed to the east, crossing fields of fire that covered the recovery vehicles. Coordinated, planned. They'd been waiting. Bateman went flat behind the engine block of the lead vehicle and started firing blind into the tree line. Stanton was shouting positions into the radio. 2 more people went to ground. The missing surveillance personnel were somewhere in the trees to the south, and nobody had eyes on them. Mercer moved. She went right, fast, and low, using the terrain a shallow depression, running east along the creek bank the way a person uses terrain who has studied it without appearing to. She was moving before anyone had registered a direction, before anyone had a plan, before the situation had resolved itself enough for decision-making to occur. She went to the high ground, not toward the contact, around it, a 200-meter flanking movement in the dark, in the snow, in broken terrain, without a light source, under active fire. Rowe saw her go. He made a decision in half a second and followed. He lost her almost immediately. She moved through the dark like she had memorized it. He heard 3 shots from the high ground. Spaced, unhurried. 1, then 2 seconds, then 1, then 3 seconds, then 1. The fire from the northern position stopped. Then 2 more shots, closer, different angle the creek bed position. The fire from the east stopped. Silence, except for wind and the sound of Bateman's breathing and the crackle of the radio. Mercer came back through the tree line from the south with both missing surveillance personnel behind her. One of them was being supported under the arm. She handed them off to Schaefer without a word and went to the vehicle and waited. The ride back was quiet. Nobody said anything for a long time. Stanton sat in the front passenger seat and stared at his hands and didn't speak the entire drive. The debrief was supposed to be procedural. It became something else. Kessler ran the initial AAR in the standard format sequence of events. Decisions made, outcomes. He was 3/4 of the way through when Holloway said, across the table, "Who is she?" Kessler stopped. "Sir." Holloway leaned forward. "With respect. 6 contacts neutralized in a flanking movement. In the dark, in broken terrain, without coordination, without support, in under 4 minutes. I've been in this unit for 6 years. I've been in service for 14. I have not seen that." He paused. "So I'm asking you, who is she?" The room was quiet. Mercer sat at the end of the table with her hands flat on the surface, looking at nothing specific, her face carrying the particular neutrality of someone who is present in a room but has made no investment in what the room decides about them. Kessler looked at her. She said nothing. He reached under the table and took out a manila folder and set it on the surface. He did not open it immediately. He looked at the folder for a moment, as if calculating something the cost of one kind of truth against the cost of another. Then he slid it to the center of the table. Holloway took it, opened it. The first page was a redacted service, summary names and locations blacked out, dates partially obscured, unit designations replaced with alphanumeric codes. But some things were not redacted. The format was not redacted. The structure of the information was not redacted. And at the bottom of the second page, in a box labeled Confirmed Enemy Combatants Neutralized Operational Record, there was a number. It was not handwritten. It was printed, official, verified by 2 separate command signatures. Holloway read it. His face did not change immediately. It took a moment, the way a face takes a moment to catch up with information that is too large to process at normal speed. He read it again. He looked up. Stanton was reading over his shoulder. The color left his face. Bateman reached for the folder. Holloway let him take it. Bateman read it, put it down. Nobody spoke. The wind hit the side of the building. The fluorescent light above the table hummed. Outside, the snow was still coming down in the steady, indifferent way it had been coming down for 3 days, as if it had no particular feeling about what was happening in the room beneath it. Mercer sat at the end of the table with her hands flat on the surface. She looked at nothing. She said nothing. Kessler said, quietly, "She has been in active operational service since the age of 19. The file has been restricted at her request. She asked not to be introduced by record." He paused. "I honored that request." Another silence. Then Bateman said, not in the tone he usually said things, not the grinning, loose-edged tone of a man looking for a reaction, but in the flat, drained voice of someone who had just understood something they couldn't take back. "I called her Princess." No one answered him. She had been 19. That was the part that stayed with Rowe later, not the number, though the number was a fact that changed the shape of every interaction he replayed in his memory. But the age. 19, in a theater that officially did not exist, conducting operations that were not recorded in public documents and would not be for another decade, if ever. She had not chosen it the way people chose things in normal life, the way a person chooses a career, a direction, a version of themselves. She had been selected, trained, and deployed in a process that had taken approximately 9 months from recruitment to first mission. 9 months to build something that most units spent years developing. The call sign in the field. In the early operations, the one her first team had given her, half mocking, half awed by the contrast between what she looked like and what she was capable of, had been Princess. She had not objected. She had not explained. She had done her job. Her spotter on the third deployment had been 22 years old. His name had been Gary. He had been from somewhere flat and cold in the upper Midwest. He had made bad coffee and read paperback novels and had been able to read terrain better than anyone she'd worked with before or since. He had died on a Tuesday in a mountain valley, in a place that was not on any unclassified map, not from enemy fire, from an equipment failure, from the specific kind of bad luck that occurred in operational theaters with a statistical regularity that suggested it was not luck at all, but simply the cost that the work extracted. She had carried him 2 kilometers to the extraction point, alone, in the dark, not because protocol required it, but because she was not able to leave him. She had been 21. Rowe did not learn all of this from the file. The file told him almost nothing, in the way that files dealing with operations of that type told you almost nothing. He learned it in pieces, over the following weeks, from the things she didn't say and the things she did. He learned it from the way she ate alone without appearing to mind it, from the way she never reached for her phone in the evenings, from the way she sat with her back to walls and her face toward doors, from the way she never, not once, flinched, not at loud sounds, not at sudden movement, not at the cold or the dark or the physical difficulty of what they trained for. She had already been through everything this place could simulate. The simulation could not touch her because she had survived the original. Things changed, not dramatically, not with a formal ceremony or an explicit acknowledgement. The military was not a place that trafficked in explicit acknowledgement. Things changed the way they changed in institutions built on hierarchy and repetition incrementally, through the alteration of small behaviors, the adjustment of minor habits. Stanton stopped saying things when she walked into the room, not because he had been told to, because he had run the math on what he'd been saying and found it embarrassing. Bateman was harder. Bateman was the kind of person who had built his self-image on confidence, on competence, on being someone who knew how things worked and moved easily through the world, and the file on the table had not simply corrected a misunderstanding. It had revised his map of himself in a way he didn't know how to process. He went quiet for a week and a half. Then one morning at the coffee station, he poured a second cup and set it next to Mercer's hand on the counter without a word and walked away. She looked at the cup. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Holloway came to her office, a small space she'd been given off the main corridor, more of a repurposed storage room than anything else, and knocked on the open door. She looked up. "I owe you an apology," he said. "The way this unit treated you when you arrived was unacceptable. I set that tone. That's on me." She studied him for a moment. The same unhurried evaluation she gave everything. "You didn't know," she said. "That's not the point." She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "It's not." She turned back to what she'd been working on. He stood there for a second, uncertain whether he'd been dismissed or simply observed, and then he went. Schaefer found her at the rifle range the following evening, running drills alone after hours. She sat on the bench next to the lane and watched for a while without speaking. Mercer ran the drill, rapid acquisition, multiple targets, transitional movement with the focused silence of someone in conversation with a problem only they could see. When she stopped to reload, Schaefer said, "I should have said something. That first week. I knew it was wrong." Mercer seated the magazine. "People don't always say the right thing at the right time. That's not an excuse." "No." She raised the rifle. "But it's true." She fired. What Rowe observed, across this period, was something he found difficult to name precisely. The unit did not become warm around her. Warmth was not the right word, and probably not what she wanted. What it became was careful, attentive. The way people become attentive around a thing they have underestimated and have been made to understand, at some cost, that they will not underestimate again. She did not seem to want their respect. She did not seem to want anything from them. She came to training. She did the work. She was present without being available. Rowe thought about that, about what it meant to be present without being available, about the specific kind of discipline that required. He thought it was probably the hardest skill she'd developed, harder than the shooting, harder than the movement in the dark, to be here and not need anything from being here, to have already done the thing and not need anyone to know. The new intake arrived on a Monday in February, 6 weeks after Mercer, 12 of them, transported from the Eastern Training Installation in 2 vehicles, arriving in the same gray morning light, in the same cold, carrying their bags across the same ice-slicked ground, the same first hour of confusion and assessment and unspoken hierarchy. One of them was small. Private First Class Nathan Hale, 20 years old, out of a small town in rural Pennsylvania, quiet in the way of someone who had learned that silence was protection. He was not weak. His record showed nothing weak, but he was small and young and new, and in the economy of a unit like this, those facts invited a particular response. Bateman saw him cross the parade ground and opened his mouth. He got one word out, the beginning of something not yet formed, the leading edge of a comment that was heading somewhere predictable. Stanton put a hand on his arm. Bateman looked at him. Stanton shook his head. Once. Small. Bateman closed his mouth. They stood there and said nothing. Holloway, watching from the steps, watched this and turned away without expression. The new intake assembled in the briefing room for orientation. Kessler ran the brief. Standard information, schedule, expectations, chain of command. The back row of existing unit personnel sat in attendance as they always did during integration briefs. Hale sat near the front. He was taking notes in a small notebook, pressing too hard with the pen the way people did when they were nervous and didn't know what to do with their hands. After the brief, in the corridor, two of the other new arrivals had located each other, the quick, instinctive coalition building of people who understood that they needed allies in an unfamiliar environment. They were not being explicitly cruel. They were doing the thing that groups do. Sorting, establishing, finding the edges. Hale was near the edge. He was standing at the water fountain, and one of the new arrivals made a comment low-voiced, not quite directed at him, directed at the air near him, and Hale's jaw tightened, and his hand on the fountain handle went slightly white. He did not look up. He did not respond. He stood there and absorbed it with the careful stillness of someone who had been absorbing things for a long time. Mercer came around the corner. She had been heading toward the equipment bay. She had no reason to be in this corridor. She rounded the corner and assessed the situation in the same single smooth pass she had used the morning she'd arrived, and she stopped. The two new arrivals looked at her. They didn't know her. They had arrived that morning. To them, she was simply another figure in the building, another person in the hierarchy they hadn't mapped yet. She looked at Hale. He met her eyes briefly, then looked away. The look of someone who expected the observation to become another comment. It didn't. She walked to the fountain. She stood beside him, not in front of him, beside him, so that she was between him and the two in the corridor. She bent and drank. She straightened. She looked at the two new arrivals. They looked back at her, reading her, finding her difficult to place. She looked at Hale. "Don't cry," she said. "Quiet. Not unkind. The way a person says a thing they believe. You'll need your eyes." She walked away down the corridor toward the equipment bay. She didn't look back. Hale stood there at the water fountain. After a moment, he let go of the handle. The two new arrivals had nothing to add. The corridor was quiet. The moment had a particular shape, the shape of something that had been redirected, not by force, but by the specific gravity of a presence that required no announcement. Outside, the snow was still falling. It fell on the parade ground and on the rifle range, and on the frozen creek in the valley 12 kilometers north, and on the road that led away from Fort Carver in every direction, and on everything beyond the road, and it made no distinction between any of it. In the equipment bay, Mercer pulled her gear from the locker and began the check she ran every morning, systematic, unhurried, the same sequence every time. Weapon, optics, harness, boots. She did not think about the corridor. She did not think about the folder on the table or the number in the box or the people who had read it and gone quiet. She thought about the gear, about the state of each component, about whether each thing was what it needed to be, in the condition it needed to be in, ready for the use it would be put to. This was enough. This had always been enough. Outside, the snow fell, and the wind moved across Fort Carver, and the flag at the top of the main building snapped and twisted in the cold. And Elise Mercer did her work, as she had always done, as she would continue to do, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without need.